What I want to do first is go quickly through some foundations before I get into going through some of the incidents and ways that I've determined over the years of working in the safety environmental realm of how to interact with ground level management, those guys that are working with the employees out there. The guys are boots on the ground. So what I'm going to do first is go over safety goals, metrics, employee performance, then improvement methods through investigative findings, and driving performance. It's really, what is the goal? What do we have as a goal within our companies to get to that safety culture that we're looking at? What I did was I went online and I found a couple companies and I went through and found these quotes. Martin Marietta Materials, again, I come from Lehigh Hanson previously, and Martin Marietta was one of our competitors. They have decision-based safety starts with a simple idea. All injuries are preventable. We've heard that before today. Embracing this fundamental belief, Martin Marietta set a goal of 0 accidents. Goal, we know that. Arch Coal, I went online and took a look. The ultimate goal of Arch and our subsidiary operations is a perfect 0. This means 0 safety incidents and 0 environmental incidents. And then from the company I used to work for, we strive for a 0 risk of accidents, injuries, and occupational illnesses by emphasizing prevention. Really, what are we all saying here? It comes down to 0 injuries. Again, we have that upper level thinking. And now, what do I need to tell those guys out in the field? Hey, I'm looking for 0 injuries. Simple. Now, that's an overarching look. Now, for employee safety performance. Now, if you tell someone that you're looking for 0 injuries, that's telling them what a goal is, but you're also telling them what not to do. You're telling them not get injured. So what do we look for from our employees that's a positive? Really what we're looking for, okay? Again, we're trying to get to an objective here, is employees that are knowledgeable of all the hazards involved in their job, know how to control these hazards, and use these controls every time. That's a philosophy that was ingrained to me about 6 years ago, really when I got into the safety and health end of things. Again, I come from the environmental side, but if you look at environmental, you're still into that safety performance. That's something you can look at. That is something you can go out and check with your employees. Not just saying, don't get hurt. Okay, I want you to know every hazard that's involved in your job. I want you to know how to control those hazards, and then I want a 0 tolerance attitude. I want you to use those controls every time. 0 tolerance means, just think of it, when you get into a car, this is how I am now. If I get into a car I'm going to drive, I feel guilty if I don't clip that seatbelt. I have to. I have to clip the seatbelt. I feel guilty if I don't. So that's that 0 tolerance attitude. That's using those controls every time. So now that's all talk. That's easy to talk in front of you. How do you talk with the line managers? So we're striving for 0. How do we get there? 0 injuries. Now again, I'm laying a foundation here. It's all about motivation. How do we motivate our employees to a higher level safety culture? How do we motivate them to get 0 injuries? How do we motivate them to have that attitude, that 0 tolerance attitude? What is motivation? Motivation comes down to clear expectations, consequences, and rewards. Again, when we're talking with those line managers, how do we discuss with them? How do we get to them for what to look for and how to interact with their employees? Again, I'm looking for that safety performance. I want that employee to know exactly what every hazard is that he isn't going to be involved in. I want them to know all the controls, and I want them to have that 0 tolerance attitude. How do I get there? We use motivation. It's general management here. Clear expectation, consequences, and rewards. What I found over a number of years was I was having a difficult time relaying that message. So I put together a presentation that I use with plant managers, line managers, trying to show them, okay, how do we motivate these people? How do we motivate them? And I found that if you use incidents, accidents, it falls through. It gives them exact examples of how to go through and do these things. So I'll give you an incident here. Not an accident, this is an incident. Through an assessment that we were doing, going out there, observing, as I've heard many times here. A maintenance journeyman had a task to clean material from below a conveyor. He de-energized, locked out, and tagged with his own lock and tag. Only worker involved in the activity. Lock, tag, test. He didn't test it. Again, just one of those things that we found. What are we looking for? I'm going to constantly say this. We're looking for him to know what the hazard is, to know what the control is, and to use it every single time. So during the investigation, dug a little bit deeper. Our findings were he did not have knowledge that he was to teach each time and never trained on the testing procedures. Again, that's a little bit digging down deep, and you're getting to a finding that you can go to the manager, his leader, and you can say, well, this is what we found. He didn't have that knowledge. First time. First part of motivation is clear expectations. He didn't have the clear expectations on what to do. Again, I'm going to repeat this many times. Are knowledgeable of all the hazards involved in their job, know how to control these, and use these controls every time. So what do? What type of tasks? What are those, instead of lagging, what do we need as leading indicators? What can we do to improve the performance? Clear expectations, new minor training, refresher training, task training, toolbox talks, supervisory check, training over the regulatory requirements. Those are all things that a manager can implement with that employee to make sure that, hey, I know I'm getting my guys all these clear expectations. Another incident, 2 individuals cleaning out the screw below the cement silo. One lock was on the electrical disconnect, so just one, 2 individuals. Again, clear expectations on what is supposed to happen. It's more of a compliance thing, but it's also, you can change this into a performance issue. Our investigations found that the individual without the lock knew the proper procedure, but did not want to take the time to go around the area and unlock the disconnect when it was necessary to turn the screw on. Did he have the knowledge of the hazard and control? Yep. He knew what he was supposed to do. Did he have the proper attitude? Absolutely not. Here's a big question. Will giving him more knowledge through training change his attitude? No, it's not gonna. That was absolutely an attitude. So a little bit different from the first incident. So what do we have? Consequences and reward recognition. We have discipline. He did something wrong. We have peer pressure. You can use a wall of shame, safety assists, getting your guys involved to check on that guy. So if you're going to discipline, would you just discipline that one individual that did it wrong? Or the guy that was working right next to him that knew he did it wrong? So again, these are all management processes. Supervisory check. Hey, getting the supervisor out there to check to make sure these guys are doing it correct, and observations. Again, these are just ideas. These are things that I think we've all used in practice in the mining and other industries. Remember the goal, 0 injuries. I keep on putting that up there because there is that, in my experience, with a culture that's not there yet, you're going to find those individuals that, you know, crap's going to happen. I'm not going to get the 0 injuries. It's still out there. And then you also have this philosophy of, hey, I have to produce. I really don't have time to go out there and observe those individuals. Remember, I put that goal. Goal is 0 injuries. That's a goal that probably the most of our companies have. And managers have to observe what their company's goals are. So it's a constant. And I'm using these, again, from my prior experience on ways to get to these guys to understand, yeah, these are the things you need to do to get that culture in place. Incident number 3. I like this one. Repairman was cutting open a tube of epoxy with a utility box knife when the knife slipped and cut the middle finger on his right hand. Box knife, constant. I mean, I see injuries like this twice a year. Investigation findings, injured employee states he was cutting away from his body, but towards his hand. was not wearing gloves. There are gloves out there to help. Not going to say it's going to reduce the risk totally, but it's going to help. And a safety alert on hand injuries from knives had been reviewed with all employees within the last 6 months. Again, these are techniques. Not saying they're the best. So looking at motivation, clear expectations, consequences, rewards. Again, the manager's job, really, it's both being mom and dad and to motivate. You got to motivate these guys to do the right thing. So you have clear expectations, consequences, reward, recognition. I consider that the same. So discipline. Would you discipline that guy or not? I don't know. That's a call that the manager has to make, not one that an ESH director has to make, because he's got to build that trust in the guy. So I'm not saying discipline's going to be used all the time. Peer pressure? Absolutely. That's a good one. Wall of shame, safety assists, tracking injuries. That's another one, okay? This guy might just be one of those guys that gets hurt all the time. Do you want him in the workforce? I'm not sure. But remember the goal, 0 injuries. You had an injury. Some guys might think, hey, he just sliced his hand a little bit. Always remember that your company expects 0 injuries, and that's what you're always trying to build towards. Incident number 4, one supervisor and a mechanic conducting maintenance on a rock hammer. As the hammer unit was being put back together, the hammer slipped in the sleeve, clipping the end of the supervisor's finger. So again, during the investigation, the mechanic had conducted this maintenance before. And if you're not familiar, you have that hammer that comes down. You have to maneuver it in. Prior to getting his fingers clipped, the supervisor had both hands inside the sleeve with the hammer suspended above. Pretty risky behavior there. Trying to eliminate these things. So again, we're going to use clear expectations, consequences, and reward and recognition. Again, these are all tools that you have as a manager at your disposal. Pretty simple. Read the manual. Manual is going to have generally how you're going to fix these things. Now as a leader above that manager, you have to make it very clear that he takes the time to read the manual. So again, it's all about motivation, whether you're at the line or at several levels above. Job safety analysis, discipline. Who gets disciplined? Is it the maintenance guy or the guy that got hurt? Peer pressure, you have the board of shame, wall of shame, safety assist, track injuries. Again, these are all areas that are tasks that can be done to get these injuries from not occurring, to get that safety culture. Incident number 5, 2 employees changing the liner on a crusher. Employee gets his finger caught when other employee's hands slip off the pry bar holding liner material. Findings, they had done this job 2 years ago without injury, but had forgotten how they had done it safely. It's probably happened many, many times. So what do you do? What can you do? Again, this is one of those clear expectations, consequences, and reward recognition. Job safety analysis. Again, discipline. Who do you discipline on that? Peer pressure, and then track injuries again. Again, these are all tasks that can happen, and the goal is 0 injuries. So if you look at all this, and this is what I found over a number of years, that's the overall. That comes from publications. I myself, in the 5 years that I was actually looking at all the investigations, I have to date waiting to see that it was the root cause was a mechanical failure. Typically a poor behavior or poor safety performance. If you look back at what we're looking at from our employees, we're looking for them to have knowledge of what the hazard is, knowledge of how to control that hazard, and the proper attitude. That's where you can point to. Didn't understand the hazard, didn't know the control, or a poor attitude. So if you can improve that safety performance, those 3 items, you can improve that safety culture. Now, in my previous role, I had to find ways of driving that performance, not just with the line managers, but right through to all levels. So how do you drive that performance? How do you guys do it with production? You do tons produced, tons per man hour, fuel used, hours worked. Those are all things that you can pick out and you can show someone and say, hey, you need to do this. Tons produced, you need to change something to get more production, positive. I want more production. Tons per man hour, I want a better percentage of tons per man hour. Those are all things that are really definable. So production measurements or metrics used by managers to drive an operations performance. How do we drive safety performance? In the past, and currently, we have total case incidents and lost time incidents. It's kind of a negative there. You don't want to have incidents. It doesn't really tell you what to do. Lagging metrics, that's a term that I've used. That's actions that have happened to you. It's reactive. So how do you drive safety performance? If you look at these are things that you can measure. These are items that I have listed in all those incidents that those managers can actually do. So you can get a number of JSAs completed or reviewed, number of observations. We've used observations. You've seen that several times this morning already. Number of safety assists, again, peer reviews. Number of outside your area of operation inspecting. I think the last gentleman had mentioned about the audits. They bring other people in from audits. So these are all things that you can actually make happen, and more importantly, you can measure. Because if the old adage is you can't manage what you don't measure. So how do you make your measurements improve performance? And that, again, goes by motivation. It all really revolves around motivation. Clear expectations, consequences, and rewards. So even at the highest level, you have to motivate. You have to put those clear expectations. So, okay, on observations, put a number to it. Then you can measure it. Near hit reports. I've always had difficulties trying to get the manager to understand that you are going to see a lot of near misses to begin with. You want to reduce them because you want to have less, but there's a lot out there. So how do you get that manager to actually go ahead and promote his guys, to motivate them to get near hits reported? Clear expectations. From the upper level, put a number to it. Then you can measure it. One of the last thing I want to go over is one of the ways that I put this into effect at Lehigh Hanson was what I call discrete pressure. It's not always easy to work. It's not always easy to try to implement all of these activities, these tasks, when not everyone believes in it. So one of the things I did in the group was I requested them to start giving me the information. Started out with safety committees. Pretty easy. How many safety committee meetings are you having? Send that information. How many observations? How many times does a supervisor go out there and check? We call them focus task audits, and observe the employee and do something. Engage that employee. Just give me the number. I didn't put a number down because I was having difficulties getting that number. I took the information, and then on a quarterly basis, I just sent it out. So I would get all these plant managers, and the good ones, man, they had great numbers. The bad managers, they didn't have good numbers at all. And what happened was throughout the region, they would compare. So one VPGM would compare to another VPGM. The plant managers would compare. And that's peer pressure. That's motivation. So I just wanted to share that with you on a way of manipulating or motivating without necessarily having the overall goal in place. I had a goal. The last thing I wanted to mention is that everything I've discussed here right now, I look at it as being in that area. I found this chart a few weeks ago, and it's an old chart. Many of you guys have probably seen it, but it's an actual Stepping Up to Safety Excellence by Larry Hansen. I thought it was a great chart. It actually shows where you are. We all want to be up at the excellence part, world class. That's where, do you have a safety committee? Nah, you don't have a safety committee. You have an operation committee that has safety within it. I think where we typically are is at the norm, trying to work up to excellence. So everything I've portrayed here, all those tasks, how to motivate, that's change management. That's motivating to get up to that next level. So I don't want you to think that I'm saying what everything I said was up to excellence. It's not. It's just at the norm. It's just getting to that next level. And these are tools that you can share with your plant managers, share with those line managers, use yourself to motivate those individuals. I thought it was a great, great chart diagram. So at the norm, working up to excellence. So I'll be around if anybody wants to try and chat with me later on. And I think I did pretty good on time, didn't I?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Again, simple. Have your programs achieved significant reductions in elevated citation rates from MSHA? And citation rates are defined as, say, citations per 100 inspector hours as a result of these programs being introduced.
Well, I'll take the first one.
Yeah, come on up, and I think, Tony, you can also come on up and answer this question, because that, I think, is a good, straightforward, simple question.
Candidly, no. Our violation rates relative to alpha, not the Massey side, but the alpha side, per inspector day has been relatively flat. The more severe violations have been reduced some. Our accident rates, our injury, NFDL, TRIR have all reduced. Part of it may be the motivational direction of where we're going, and some of it may be other factors, but the short answer is that relatively, if you're only measuring at one indicator, violations per inspector day, I'd mark it fairly flat.
The measures we traditionally look at within ARCH are violations per inspection day and S&S percentage. Those have remained fairly constant. Compared to the industry average, I think we're pretty solid. The number of elevated actions that have been issued in our operations have gone up. I think that's partly because the level of inspection scrutiny over the past couple of years has increased. But also compared to the industry average, the number of 104Ds, 107s that ARCH has is very low compared to the other major coal companies.
Any follow-up on that?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can tell you from the aggregates perspective, from when I worked at Lehigh Hanson, and we had both cement and the aggregates end, I found that the cement was going down, okay, but the aggregates end was going up. And the reason that really was coming about was cement was a bit behind the aggregates on the whole culture issue. Aggregates was going up exactly what you had just mentioned. There was more, the severity was going up, S&S's. And I believe it was purely because MSHA took a different stance, and they started calling more things S&S. And they were also those items that they were helping the producers with in the past. So helping, I mean, fix that before I leave. That changed. So those little items just changed. So they weren't doing that. That's wrong, you're going to get a citation. And that's why I believe it went up.
Any more follow-up on that? That's a very good question, and also points to the objective of safety culture is different from objective of enforcing laws and regulations and finding violations. And that, I think, is the key. Go ahead if you want to comment on it.
Is anybody from MSHA here besides Bill?
I think I'm the only brave one.
Oh, I see somebody in the back. Okay, Jeff. Both you guys put your hands over your ears.
Hey, John, every time you say anything.
Okay.
It's not a crime, you get caught.
Fair enough. I think when we were talking about culture, and I think, and Tom, I may have had it in his slides or some of our discussions back and forth. Forgive me, I may be wrong. You have to say, look, as an organization, you have to comply with the regulations. Unfortunately, unlike Australia, where the regulations, I think Tom did say this, I know he said it today, where the regulations in Australia tend to be your risk management program and your process and what you're going to do, they're the same thing. In the United States, they will be entirely different, and it will continue to be different. You still have to manage them. You still cannot afford to have the records that, well, bluntly, if you look at the Massey organization compliance records, whether you agree with them, disagree with them, or whatever you want to do with it, as a industry or as a company, you will not survive along with those kind of records because of the public perceptions. So you have to really deal with them. From a system standpoint, you need to look at it and say, how many of these are the result of our systems failing? Are these indicators of things in our systems that we're turning a blind eye to? And that. But at the end of the day, I think that's what they are. They never can be your leading indicator of how well you're doing. They can be certainly a measurement of your system's weaknesses and inadequacies and needs to change and strengthen, and that's where it needs to be. And that's the best it can be. In our present regulatory climate, that's the best it's ever going to be.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I think that enforcement is very important, and particularly with bad actors. But if you think about it, enforcement focuses on poor performance or bad performance. And unless you have something to counterbalance that, to show people what good performance looks like, you're never going to get off a dead center. And one of the examples that I like to cite is game of baseball. A 300 hitter is a good performer, and he fails 66% of the time. If we were to issue a citation or a fine every time that 300 hitter failed, how long do you think he would be a 300 hitter? You've got to look at ways to identify and show people what good performance looks like so that they know what to do. There's a lot of issues out there in the industry, but I tend to think that that 99% of the people out there want to try to do the right thing. So we need to come up with ways that we can show them how to do the right thing and encourage them to do that.